Today's video is about normal distribution. The first thing I want you to do is actually stop this video. There's another video I'd like you to either copy um, the link at the bottom or go back to the lesson sheets where there's a link that you can click on with it's a couple of minutes long talking about the normal distribution and where it comes from. So pause the video and then come back once you've watched that. Okay, welcome back. So I hope the video explains a little bit about how the normal distribution came about that we talked about in the last lesson, that distributions are just a way of recording data. But then when people started putting them into graphs and things like that, we started to notice patterns. And you can see the GIF that I've got on the screen in the video that it changes. It starts off looking at SAT scores and looking at the intervals in which people get them. This would look the same too if you increased the frequency and kept the the group got bigger. You would actually notice that it would form more of that normal distribution shape. So the key features of a normal distribution is that most measurements are in the middle. There are a few extreme values both above and below the mean. So it's this classical bell shape here, where if we put the values across the bottom, which we call x, and remember x can be anything. So it can be the weights of babies, heights of students, anything in the natural world. And the frequency goes up. Now, obviously, to change that into probability, all we need to do is divide by the total. And the other way to think about it is if it's a percentage, it's the same as well. But even though the shape is the same, obviously there's two features that won't be the same for all normal distributions. Is the population mean, which we use a Greek letter mu to describe, and also the standard deviation, which we use a sigma to describe as well. If we are using a sample, we use an S and an X bar. But that's not something you should worry about, but you may see it written in different things you look at. So that's the key thing with normal distribution. The shape is the same no matter what the variable is. What changes is the mean and standard deviation. So what is the standard deviation? Well, the standard deviation just describes the spread of the data. So things can have a similar median but look very different because they're spread further out. So there's more variation in a graph with a large standard deviation, and there's less variation in one with a small standard deviation. But the key bit of information that we should, and what they found using the standard deviation, is that all normal distributions follow the same rule. Is that if this is the mean in the middle, that between each of the first standard deviations above and below the median, it's 68%. In other words, there are 34% in each section. The two standard deviations, so two standard deviations below and two standard deviations above, there's 95. So that means that there's 13 13.5% in this section, 13.5% in this section. And then for the very last part, that 3 standard deviations, so -3 +3, is that there's 99.7 standard, which means that each of these sections is worth 2.35, 2.35, leaving 0.15. Oh, that's a little bit high. 0.015, 0.015 above. So the real power of that is that if you wanted to know between 1 standard deviation below and 1 standard deviation above this area, then we could just add 34 and 34 together and then add 13.5. And in fact, if we then wanted to know, say, minus 1.5 to plus 0.75, we could try and work out what probability that is. And that's basically normal distribution, is using the proportion of the graph and the standard deviation and to work out what percentage of the area is within those values. So there's a video on looking at using normal distribution. I'd like you to watch it. It is quite in depth, but there is quite a lot of stuff in that. Once you finish that, in the lesson page in your OneNote, there is a worksheet. There is you don't need to work in your workbook for this lesson, but you will need to look at that worksheet. You either open it up onto your screen. If you have a printer at home, preferably you print it off and work it on that. If not, it would be on your screen and you're working on refill or something like that to do that. There's answers as well. Make sure you've marked that before you go on to the next lesson.